When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a Wittenberg church door in 1517, he sparked a revolution. The results of the Reformation are still being felt today around the world. Luther's teaching on the priesthood of all believers is alive and well. But what many have forgotten is Luther's equally revolutionary teaching on the doctrine of vocation. And these two doctrines combined changed the course of history. How so? Well, the doctrine of vocation dissolved the sacred secular divide that had elevated the work of the clergy to God's work status, while relegating the work of the milkmaid and the farmer to common labor status, with a gap between. Well, Luther asserted that milking cows is God's work too. Now that was radical thinking. Yet, how many people today would seriously refer to dairy farming or truck driving as the Lord's work? Well, this gives you a hint as to how far the doctrine of vocation has slipped. Early reformers like John Calvin taught the doctrine of vocation, and they saw astonishing results. Calvin was challenged by the French evangelist William Farel to get out of his ivory tower and come down to Geneva to apply the theology he was writing about to the real world of a broken down city. Well, Calvin took up the challenge, and by the grace of God, he turned Geneva, which had a reputation as the smelliest city in Europe, he turned it into a model for all of Europe. Now, Calvin's approach was based on the preaching of the gospel, so individuals could come into a direct personal relationship with God through faith in Jesus Christ. Number two, teaching people how to live in the world, which included how to work in all spheres of society, whether it was civil or economic, to the glory of God. And the Puritans carried the doctrine of vocation to the New World. Max Weber called it the Protestant work ethic. And this work ethic provided a foundation for the development of the United States. This ethic was built on the idea that a man's shop and his chapel were both vitally important parts of God's purpose in the world. In fact, it was the English Puritan George Swinnock who said, "The pious tradesman will know that his shop as well as his chapel is holy ground." Reformers who came after Luther and Calvin during the 1600s applied the doctrine of vocation to education. And one of those second-generation reformers was John Comenius. Now, Comenius really is a towering figure in the field of education. And he was motivated by a vision for the practical application of Christian virtue in and through vocation. Vocation was a practical way to glorify God in all the earth through all human endeavor. God was glorified as human beings imitated him in their work. Through the creation of furniture, the making of shoes, or the rightful management of money as bankers. Well, early Harvard and Yale were really built upon a robust doctrine of vocation. It was an integral part of the Puritan curriculum. In fact, it had a name. It was called Technologia. And the graduates of early Harvard and Yale, including Jonathan Edwards, were expected to master the Technologia. And it remained central to the curriculum of Harvard and Yale for about 150 years. It really made a difference in the early development of what was to become the United States. But over time, education became secularized. The doctrine of vocation waned, and the old sacred secular divide returned. Now, Protestants have not let the doctrine of the priesthood of all believers die, but we have let the doctrine of vocation die. Dualism has crept back into our thinking, and with it, the division between the so-called sacred and secular jobs. Today, pastors and missionaries do the Lord's work, not dairy farmers, truck drivers, or bankers. Well, we've lost sight of the fact that God does his work in the earth through carpenters, cops, and CEOs. Yet Luther, Calvin, and Comenius understood this, and it changed history. Now, I believe a robust theology of work can and must be restored. A natural place for this to happen is in the Christian schools. But I was a school principal of a Christian school for 14 years, and it never entered my mind once that I ought to have a systematic approach to theology of work in the K-12 curriculum. For me, it really was the missing curriculum. I fully understood the necessity for teaching students biblical worldview and for training teachers in the skills of biblical worldview integration in all subjects. But I failed to carry it to the next level. I believe that if we're going to see a significant transformation in the culture at large, it will require taking biblical worldview integration beyond the classroom, beyond academics. How many of our students really have a vision for their daily work that allows them to see their shop and their chapel as both holy ground? For students, of course, their shop is their classroom, and it's also the sports field, and it's at home taking out the garbage. That's where they do their work. How many students view their work as the Lord's work? How many of them see their work as a calling and as a way to bring glory to God in the here and now? And does their concept of work allow them to see the work of architects and civil servants and homemakers as the work of the Lord? If you ask 10 students in your sphere to name 3 professions that qualify as the Lord's work, don't elaborate on the question. Just let it speak for itself and see how many of your students will mention occupations like truck driving, banking, or carpentry. If they do, great. If they don't, well, you've got a reason to take this course. Well, can you imagine what would happen if in any nation followers of Christ were engaging in their daily work, no matter what field they were in, as though that work were truly the work of God? Let me sum it up this way. Culture is shaped by the behavior of its filmmakers, its business people, its civil servants, and its homemakers. This behavior is governed by the values these individuals hold. And those values are shaped by their inner commitments to what's really real. And that's what we call their worldview. Now, many Christian educators grasp the necessity for teaching biblical worldview and for integrating it with all subjects, yet this is not an end in and of itself. It's a means to a much greater end, and that greater end is what has motivated me to develop this course, which I call Increase Meaning, a holistic approach to Christian education. I have 2 big, hairy, audacious goals in life. Number 1 is to motivate and equip followers of Christ to create all kinds of culture in the world that is becoming to God. And number 2, to turn the very aim of education toward applied virtue through vocation. Would you join me in this? Now is the time. Well, I look forward to what God has in store for us in the future.